Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's panel on navigating generational differences, learning how to customize employee experiences for a multi-generational workforce. I'm Rod Hutchings, and I'll be moderating today. I'm coming from Melbourne, Australia, and it's just after midnight here in Australia, and really looking forward to today's conversation and to make it quite personal. Like today is my 40 years ago today is when I joined the Royal Australian Air Force. So that's quite an anniversary for me. So I've really been looking forward to this conversation. So if we can bring forward our panelists, please. And welcome everyone. Really looking forward to discussing this topic. And if to get us started, if we can we'll go virtually around the room, and we'll start with Linda. And if you just want to introduce yourself and what fascinates you about this topic, just a little icebreaker to get going. So welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Rod. So I'm Linda Yang. In short, the best way to explain what I do is I create people experiences. I think we all here do that. And there's so many layers to it, right? And so to answer your question, Rod, what fascinates me about this topic is that we deal with this every day, and I think the magic happens when we get creative. And so it's nice to meet you all, and I'm excited to chat today.
Thank you. And welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa Sanders. I'm joining from the Bay Area in California, San Francisco. I've been doing people, places, talent, and culture for over 20 years. Super excited to be here. Why is this particularly interesting to me as a panel discussion is that, I'm older, I'm not I'm not a Gen X, right, or a Z. For me, it's super important to understand the why people work and separate it from the how, right? And I think that's the key to understanding how to balance that multi-generational that we're all part of. It's just part of business. In how to fully understand that and how to approach work.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. And Sarika, did you say him?
Sarika. Hi, Rod. Good to see you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Lamont. I lead the people function at a tech company in Canada. I love this topic. I think probably first and foremost, I sit sort of on the cusp. I'm on the very top end, I guess, of a millennial, but I find myself identifying differently than a millennial in a lot of ways. And so I think that's like what really sparked my initial interest in how much work has changed and how I came up in the working world and the expectations of how to move up or where to go and how to like design your career. It's just fundamentally so different now. I haven't always been in the people space. I've done a lot of work on the client delivery side and in management consulting. And so it's just always been fascinating as I've done different things inside of an organization, how people work differently. And I also think this is the first time at least in my working experience, that we have almost 5 generations in the workforce. And so it's extra complex and extra fun to figure out how to solve for those and design for those experiences. So I'm very excited for this discussion today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Tammy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tammy Chaik. I own a leadership development company called We Inspire We. And kind of our whole passion and premise is really helping people tap into their authentic strengths and gifts. And so I find this topic to be so fascinating because we try to stereotype and broadly look at groups because we want to better understand them. But yet at the heart of it all, we're humans and we're different and individual and unique. So I find this to be quite interesting to get into, right? How do we broadly look at groups and understand how they tick, how they operate, how they work? But then also how do we individually look at the people and how they show up and what they need from us as leaders or HR professionals or whatever it is. So I find this topic to be quite interesting across the board.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. And it's just amazing how, and I think it was mentioned already, how I think today there's multi-generations certainly in the workforce, and maybe more than there ever has been. I think people are working longer on average probably than it did certainly when I started my career. All right, so to get us started, I'm going to I'll come first back to Tammy, and just going to say ask, like, can we just and maybe it's a big question in a way, but just start describing the various needs each generation has. Like, what are some perspectives on what other generations we're looking at, and then multi-layer is also, what do we think sort of consistent across the board for all generations. So
yeah, thanks, Rod. And I think this obviously is a really big question, because there are so many nuances that we can apply to each of the groups. Again, as we broadly stereotype, and I'm going to use a little cheat sheet to help me out here. If anyone's familiar with a woman named Britt Andriata, she's a neuroscientist, and she studies leadership from a chemical brain perspective. And she kind of provided this little graphic that I love referencing, and it kind of breaks down, what do each generation, who are they, what do we need? So I think, starting kind of at the far end, the baby boomers, it's interesting when you think about this group, because they have really been a loyal worker, if you will, long-term loyalty to companies, put your head down, do a good job, the rest will follow, kind of fighting tooth and nail for their own success. They certainly appreciate and support each other and support others in the world around them. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, I've worked hard, I deserve the credit. You should work as hard as I did to get to where you need to go. Then you have the Gen X generation, which is mine. And Sarika, like you, I'm on the cusp of being a different generation, so I can relate a little bit to others. But the Gen X generation was kind of like, hey, they worked really hard, and we probably should work really hard too. But maybe we want to have a little bit more of a life, with work. We want to have a little bit more balance going into it. So it was still this kind of individual pursuit. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do a good job. I'm going to do what I need to do to roll up my sleeves and get the job done. But I also don't want to sacrifice life outside of work in the process. Then we have the millennial generation, who comes in and says, yeah, you Gen Xers kind of have it, right? Like, I need life outside of work, and I need that to be really important to me. I also want to do a good job, and I want to have meaningful work. But I think it's got to come through the lens of how it's going to help people, help things be better. So it's that shift from like the hard work and putting the time into, I'm going to only do what is really going to matter and make a bigger difference. And then you have Gen Z, this younger generation coming in, and, we even have Alpha, which is starting to creep into the world too. I won't go there, but in Gen Z, they've taken the millennial perspective of helping and benefiting others one step even further. And it's so much more mission-based and purpose-based. And what can I do to really make a meaningful change in the world, all while taking advantage of the personal benefits, right, that we've kind of seen kind of trickle down year over year, generation over generation. So that's a very, very broad representation, if you will. But I will just add one last thing in there. When I think about the dynamics of each of these groups, I think it all goes back to value, right? Each and every one of these generational nuances is, how do I add value or feel like I am being valued, but it shows up in a slightly different way. I'll pause and let anyone else add to it there.
That was a really good start.
Yeah, you did a great job really highlighting it pretty succinctly. I find the interesting thing about, millennial generation, Gen Z, is which is very different than what you started with in talking about baby boomers, is like, they're just sort of heads down, you're loyal, you stay at a company for a really long time. Like, I remember coming up in the working world, early 2000s, coming out of college, and like, that was what we were always taught. Like, you need to stay somewhere for a long time. You don't job hop, because that looks terrible. So I remember my first two companies, I was at the first one for 6 years, the next one for 3, and then the one after that for 8 years. And people thought I was crazy. Like, how do you stay at these jobs for so long, as I got further down into my career? But what's interesting now, like, you're also taught, don't speak up. Like, you just kind of have to go with the status quo. You don't challenge against it. You do really, really hard work. You value, like, you think about your own personal value and who you are as a human by defining yourself by your work, which, we could talk all day about the implications of that inside of, the working world. But nowadays, these generations are willing to fight. Like, they're willing to speak up, and they're willing, and they're going to say, like, I will easily just walk away from a company if I don't believe in their values, and I don't think the leaders are exhibiting these values, and they're not giving back into the community around us. I know that inside of my own organization, it's one of the things I loved about and really brought me to this organization is their focus on the community around them and the community inside. It's like this dual focus, and people really invest a lot of time in the surrounding communities to give back. And it ties back to your point of like, now I feel like our, more recent generations, they want to work somewhere that they tie truly to the mission. Like there's a purpose in what they're doing, and the purpose and the driving factor behind that isn't necessarily money. Yes, they want to make money. And yes, they're going to fight for compensation very differently than I would have fought for compensation. Like some of them a little bit are like, yeah, I'm going to work hard, but I'm not going to go above and beyond if you're not willing to pay me for it. Versus I was taught you have to go above and beyond if you want to get promoted. And that's how you get paid. You do the work first before you get paid. And so but it's very interesting because they'll walk away from all of it if they don't feel any connection to the mission. And I am like, I'm envious of it. But I will tell you, it does make our jobs as HR leaders super challenging to design for that. Because as you know, we don't have all the control across our business strategies and where we invest and how we invest. And at least on the tech side, it's become even harder. Everyone's working with strapped budgets. This pressure to be much more efficient, and like productivity is everything and efficiency, but we're now flatter, but you got to be able to do all this. It's just a very complex time, I feel like, in the working world, especially on the tech side. I can speak at least from that perspective, that I find in all of these sort of varying desires that these different generations have, it's making it a lot harder for us to be productive in designing the right experience for them.
No, that's really good. Anything else want to add, Lisa? Or
yeah, being Gen X, and I, like you, I'm on the cusp there. Sarika, I mean, if you think about when, it's 1965 to 1990, that's a really big span, right? A lot's changed from 1965 to 1990, right? And I joined the workforce, around the early 2000s, early 2000s. And, I had to fight really hard. I had to scrape, I had to crawl, right, to get to where I am today, right? And I think that so much has changed in that period that, yes, we definitely, I now value a balance, but in the early 2000s, I did not. I needed a job, right? And I needed to keep that job. And I did whatever I needed to do to keep that job, right? And we sacrifice a lot for that. And I think that to your point, sacrifice has become something that people are less willing to do, right? There's only so much sacrifice I'm going to do, right? And I think for us too, I think we've come around, right, as a generation, like, hey, you know what? We don't have to give it all, we don't have to give our entire lives, right? Which is a good thing, right? Where, we learn from each, generation. But it was hard. It was not easy. It was a rough road.
Plus 100, girl. I'm like nodding along, like, I can remember some of those moments of time. But you made it. That's an important point that we're learning from each other. Like, I think this is so valuable to have these many generations and perspectives in the workforce. But what I will say is, I really want even the younger generations that have come after me, that I'm working alongside or working with, to also be willing to hear us out as well. Like we're learning from you. And I think from that, I'm learning the value of just work-life balance is so important. And as a mother of two growing kids who have a lot of needs now and a lot of sports and everything, like I'm trying every day is a balance. Like watching my kids, they're at home from summer break and they're like running around in front of me right here. So it's like it's a constant balance. But I also equally want the other generations behind us to also think about, well, what could I learn from Sarika? Like she's been in the working world for, over 20 years. Okay, there is something to like, you do have to work and you have to learn these skills if you want to get promoted. If you want to be in management and leadership, you kind of got to learn a little bit more about the business. Like we're not just going to hand it to you because you've been in a role for a year or 2 years and because you want it and you're willing to speak up. Like there's got to be a balance strike here. And I will be honest, a lot of this dialogue happens in with a lot of my HR colleagues. And it always feels like we're like employees, everything, and employers have it wrong and employees got to do all the things. But I find that there needs to be a bit more balance striked about the expectations of employees as well. And you got to be willing to meet us halfway. because at the end of the day, we work in a business that is a for-profit business. I don't make the rules there. Like, it is what it is. So we do have to find the right balance where we can design these experiences that are fruitful and connecting you to the mission and really giving you a lot of purpose, while also giving you the space to have a life outside of work. But you have to be able to contribute and be productive when you're at work, because that's the only way that we can continue to invest in one another, is got to make money to be able to do that. So there is a bit of a balance strike there that I know I working on with my own organization, and it can be a struggle sometimes. It really can.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story that is just yesterday, I was coaching someone that told me that they were going to leave their job. They said, I'm unhappy. They was based on one incident, right? And I said, okay. I said, I'm going to stop you for a minute, and I'm going to ask you if did you accomplish what you wanted to when you joined this company? Right? Did you actually, do you feel like, okay, I'm leaving. I did what I set out to do here. And he paused and he said, no, I haven't. And I said, well, how about you think about that and maybe stick it out a little bit longer and finish it, right? Have that grit to do it, right? It's not that tap out, I'm out, right? And I find that a lot. Well, I'm not happy with this. Nope, I'm out, right? It's very flippant, right? And when you share stories, and I'm sure you guys do, I do all the time, of experiences I've had in my career. It's a lot. There isn't much I haven't seen. It ties people to something, to your points, that you do have to work, right? We're all here to work, right? We have jobs, right? We all contribute in some way to the bottom line, right? But I try to use stories to tie them to that, right? Of, this was a situation, and I did it yesterday with this person, and I said, here's what I did. I sat down and asked myself the question, did you accomplish what you needed to, or that you set out to in this role before you leave? And the answer was no. And so I sat there and I persevered, and it was the best thing I ever did. I grew more than I could have ever imagined. And at the end of the day, he's like, you're right. So.
All right. I think we'll move on, but that's been a really great opening to the panel. All right. So I guess what we've heard is really understanding and adapting to these different generation needs is really crucial for basically effective management and providing the right environment for the different generations. And so my next question, and I'll come to Linda for this, is how do leaders then and HR professionals adapt their approach based on these different needs that we've just been speaking about? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes. I could talk about this all day. So, all great points and great intro. And Tammy, thank you so much for the overview of each generation. I think everyone here has seen the differences, right? And so, when it comes to customizing the experience, what I always say is, think of the people experience as a straight line. And within that straight line is the boilerplate, the processes that we all know. And how far you kind of go above and below that line is your company's people experience, right? And so for me, what I like to do when I speak to companies about their people experiences, even before the generational differences and addressing that, is okay, what is the ideal experience we want to kind of address and we want to implement, and how do we want to stick in people's minds, right? Or is that even a goal? And then we dive into, okay, depending on the individual, what are these signs in terms of, okay, I'm noticing that this individual is struggling a little bit here on the onboarding side, so how can I customize it? So my approach is understanding and acknowledging generational differences, having that in the back of my mind. And as new hires come in, or as I deal with folks, manage with folks, then I use that as a skill set and a tool set to help them in their experiences and supporting them. And so, and when it comes to really customizing, and my advice to companies really is to just listen to your folks, be prepared with your tools, be prepared with your resources, and pivot as necessary. Don't ever assume, I come in, and in, the companies I work for, I'm very out and about, like, hey, I'm a millennial. I have 4 kiddos. I'm a mama. Like, I am made up of a lot of identities, and I'm happy to say that. And so being open in my approach of doing that naturally folks are more open to be, transparent with myself. And if they ever have any hiccups, like, hey, Linda, like I'm a little older, and I'm not as fast paced as the tech stack here. Can you help me? And so creating those environments. And so I think as HR professionals, we have that responsibility of being the face of the company, creating the standards of the environment, and then creating a psychological, safe place for different generations to come in to say, hey, I think I may be experiencing this, and can you help me? But yeah, so that would be my advice in terms of how companies would, customize per generation.
Linda, I love the line reference and kind of above and below, because I think that's right. Like you have to have kind of a standard approach and process to what is the employee experience, what's the journey like. But as HR professionals and as leaders of teams, it's your job to adjust and adapt so that you can make sure the individuals are getting the best experience along the way. I taught a class recently on how to do recognition for your team. And the same thing is like, you have to understand what's the individual's intrinsic value and what are they motivated by and what are their needs states. So there's a lot of like customization that comes into it, but you have to be able to think about the broad audience and then the individuals and adjust accordingly, which is not easy. But I think that's where the art form of leadership comes into play.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Rod, to answer the question that you put. I think that organizations need to understand where they are today, right? What is the maturity of the organization, the people in it, the different layers, right? Before you head into customizing, a program around addressing generational differences, right? And I think that at the core of it, personally, for me, is learning and development across all generations, right? We all need to learn, right? I am a continuous learner, and we all need to learn new things and adapt in different ways. And to your point, learn tech stacks, right? The only way they're going to do that, I can't teach them that, right? And most companies don't have the internal resources or bandwidth to actually do that. Have a program in place that fits where your organization is today. Make it flexible. It has to be flexible, right? It's got to be able to change tomorrow, because if everything turns around in a 360, you need to be able to adapt, right? Communicate that. This is flexible. This is what we're doing right now, right? And we're open, continuous feedback loop, right? Tell us how it's going, right? But I think that the crux of it is that if the company is committed to a really good L&D program, and I'm not going to say robust or big because it depends on the size of your company, right? But that everyone has access to, you're going to start to see more people in upskilling, right? And learning new things, right? And that's what we all want. At the end of the day, it's, we all want to learn and grow, right? I don't know very many people who don't want to learn and grow. There are some, but most do, right? They want to advance, personally, professionally, emotionally, all of that.
No, that's absolutely so true. And I think there's so many different learning opportunities that are available today. And that's, whether people are just even on these Hacking HR panels, there are ways of learning.
I use my coaches, right? I have a personal board of directors that I go to all the time, because I have as many questions as the next person, right? And I need to be checked and I need to be put in my place sometimes. And that's where I go for that, right? So you don't have to spend a lot of money. Companies spend resources and money and to put and do that if you have it. But if you don't, there are creative ways that you can do that, right? I've helped many people build a personal board of directors. It's invaluable. That's a community. I have a huge community. That's one of them, right? That you can tap into. So there's lots of ways.
Yeah. All right. So now, anyone else want to add into the question I asked earlier about how do leaders adapt their approach? Anyone more to add to that one before we move on?
In terms of adapting the approach, I think the most important thing is like listening to learn and understand rather than listening to respond. You can learn a lot just by having conversations with the different employees in your organization of different generational backgrounds and what they desire and what's working and what isn't working. I mean, there's so many ways, obviously, to communicate with employees. There's, of course, there's surveys, et cetera. I really love, we have something set up in our organization called Donut Chats, and it's automatically done in Slack. And for me, I love it because it automatically will connect me with employees that I don't, talk to all the time. For whatever reason I might, and we're a remote first organization. I'm in the US and most of our employees are in Canada. So I don't get to go to the office and see who's in the office. And it's, again, like it's a remote first. So it connects with me people all over the business in different environments and in different locations. And then I get that opportunity to ask them, I get a chance to learn about them first of all. And then as I build that rapport over time, it's like, well, tell me what's working. Tell me what isn't working. Tell me, we just launched this program. What do you think about it? What could we do differently? Like oh, okay, you don't connect with it. Why not? And that I feel like has been the best way for me to really understand what is and isn't working and how I might adapt our programs and processes differently. And I have a whole team around me who I'm fortunate enough to have the team I have around me who does a lot of the same things. They're talking to employees regularly, and we do a really great job about sharing insights with one another on a regular basis. And just like in marketing, you build personas. You have different personas and different ICPs for different reasons. You're essentially sort of doing the same thing. And you could take a more structured approach. I've done a more structured approach behind it. You can build these sort of like cards. I'm like, I have this persona, and this person is like the go-getter, is going to do X, Y, and Z, wants these things in their career. Well, this person is more focused on work-life stability. And right now they're really good where they are, but this is what they really value. Maybe it's more benefits to support their family and work-life balance. But it gives you a general sense of like, I can at least bucket people into these like types of personas to give me a more generalized understanding of what people really desire. So when we go to enhance processes or programs or launch new things, I know what I need to design for based off of that.
Yeah. Now, coming to this, the point around education, I guess what really something that fascinates me is how intentional, in your experience, as a group, are organizations actually, talking to their managers, to their employees about the different generational identities we've spoken about so far. So, I'm just wondering how can organizations educate their workforce about these different identities, and do you see happening? So I'll ask that to anyone in the panel who wants to give that one a go to start off.
Rod, this is such a good question, because when I think about like so much that we do inside of the organization to connect our employees, whether it's programming to create, more inclusivity and belonging, or trainings, et cetera, I will take accountability here. This is a big miss on our end in terms of, even if I think about this from the DE&I B lens or, or what have you, that this is a conversation that we're not, I think, intentionally and directly having. Now, I can't speak for our managers. I'm sure our managers and leaders recognize this across their teams, that they have differing, age groups, experiences, et cetera. And I'm sure that they adapt the way that they engage based off of those criteria. But it's not like a direct conversation we're having today, and I've had in other forums. And you've really got me thinking that this is definitely something that we need to design for inside of our organization. And the best way I feel like people learn, there's a place for, having guest speakers and keynote speakers to come in and talk. But for me, what I really value is I don't want people talking at me or at my organization. I want someone coming in who's going to equally educate, but also create a forum for real discussion, because I believe the real learning is going to happen from one another. And Lisa, to your point, sharing stories with one. I mean, we all talk about storytelling is so powerful. It's so powerful when we're trying to sell a program to our leadership or to our boards. It's just as powerful to create connection amongst the people in your organization. Like, they should be teaching one another by like authentic conversation and experiences, versus me hiring someone to come in and talk about generational differences. But now have me thinking that is definitely something. And I know there's some people on my team that are on this right now, so they're probably taking notes on things that we could do differently inside of our own org.
No, I like you bring that up, because where it became quite very obvious to me was coming out of COVID, where we had hired a whole lot of graduates, and we had the graduates were keen. They were all in the office, like every day. They were there every day. Whereas the more mature people like myself, we still wanted to work at home. And what soon became, like, when I say soon, it probably took 6 to 12 months, working out that, the people just starting out, they were really thirsty for having these conversation stories to actually, learn from the rest of the organization, and they were only getting to talk to each other mainly. So it took some intention, to encourage to get some that community happening within work, to get those stories, to get that those connections within the team going. That's a bit of my experience. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think there's a lot of work to do around multi-generational training. And honestly, I don't know of any program that's out there, right? And that's an untapped area, right, that we should certainly be exploring. For me, I think the training has always kind of fallen on me, when it not only for multi-generational but also culturally, right? I build global organizations, and there's cultural differences, right? Beyond just, generational. And so I end up doing a lot of that training by making sure that people understand how to best communicate with the different people in different locations, right? And that means I need to understand it so that I can then, give that training to people. But I think that there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in that training of, how and why we all work, right? And really understanding that. And to your point, you can't talk at me, right? Don't talk at me, because I don't hear, right? It needs to be interactive. And maybe, and I'm just off the top of my head, maybe OKRs are not OKRs. I'm sorry. I'm completely drawing a total blank. ERGs. Thank you. So many acronyms. Might be the right thing to look at potentially, right? Starting ERGs, because you're, to your point, Rika, we're learning from each other, right? And to start that conversation. Maybe that's a good place to start it. I don't know.
I'd love to tap in here, if that's okay, Brad.
Yeah, definitely. Please.
In the HR realm, intersectionality and DEI, and definitely a pathways forwards, by what I've seen, is my fellow millennials and my Gen Zers, intersectionality top of mind. Diversity is no longer just an employer brand situation. Companies are now being held accountable by these generations to say, okay, you say diversity, what does that mean to you, and how are you implementing it? I've talked to, I help with both candidate side job seekers and as well as my own teams. And that's what kind of the recurring story of, okay, you bought me in, I'm interested in your company. Now, you mentioned diversity, intersectionality. I'm going to now scope to see, how to keep you accountable. And I think, yes, that's challenging for us as HR professionals, but I take it as a good challenge in terms of how can I get creative and how can I customize it to each company, because it's going to be different for each company, right? That experience. And so, a recent study I read about Gen Zers, just kind of, they want to know, like, but to Sarika's point earlier about purpose and mission, now it's, okay, intersectionality, you should at least know that it relates to injustice. It's not just multiple identities. Let's talk about it. And if, the company has no initiative, pull people in who are interested. Hey, folks, so what I usually do is, how can I keep this memorable and stick and retain outside of discussion? And how I do this is create a task force, in a sense of, hey, folks, I'd love to do this. And I'd love for y'all to partner up with me. Reach out to me, DM me, and let's have a chat. And how that's kind of resulted in the companies I've worked for is just, each initiative from my department, Department 1, by the way, is connected by cross-functionally by each other department and by different folks from different experiences. And so just wanted to come in and add that little tidbit.
Thanks, Linda. So moving on again, and like one thing that I have 17-year-old and 15-year-old, and I find that the way that they desire to communicate and what they think is quite routine is, sending messages seems to be the most common. For me, I'm accustomed to, I like to speak to people, and so the way that we communicate and the way that is certainly can be different between the different generations. And sometimes those different ways of communicating, you can get conflict, but it shouldn't, not for any great reason, just misunderstandings, assumptions made. So just wondering, I guess, what are some of the common generational conflicts that you encounter, and how would you address them? And I'll get it starts that to anyone wants to jump into that.
I'll just speak from personal experience. Back several years ago, when I first had my first, I'm a Gen Xer, my first millennial employee working for me, there was such an attitude around like, our way is better, and I think boomers probably had the same attitude around Gen Xers, and maybe millennials have the same attitude now about the Gen Zers. I'm not quite sure, but I think that tends to be the biggest source of conflict is, well, my way, the path that I went down or the path I'm going down is the better way. So I think, the crux of the conflict is differences. We're approaching things differently. And we're not necessarily taking the time to understand where the other is coming from or seeing the benefit of where the other is coming from. So, I'm obviously very broadly generalizing here, but I think the biggest thing is to go back to the individual and what is the value that they're bringing or can bring, and how to bring the most out of that versus my way. I worked hard and kept my head down, and at least same as you, right? Like, we worked really hard to get into these roles, and everyone else should work really hard too. I think we just have to appreciate the individuality in it.
Thanks, Tammy. Anyone else want to add on to that?
I think there's a number of ways I feel like I've observed the generational conflicts inside of our org. I mean, I think one way is communication, how we communicate. I mean, younger generations can communicate with using so many modes. Like, they'll communicate with you via TikTok if they need to, right? And send you a meme, and that's going to tell you, like, there's so many memes that get shared in different channels in our we use Slack, and so there's like different channels for different things, and it's so fun to watch how even the younger generations will communicate literally via memes. Like, they may never use words, but they'll only use memes, and I think it's awesome, and I think it's funny. But the older generations, they don't understand it, and they don't always value it in the same way. And I have seen older generations get frustrated. Like, what is this? This is so unprofessional. I'm like, well, I don't know that it's unprofessional. Who defines what's professional anymore? We have 5 generations in the workforce. We are not the ones that define always what professional might look like. And that's how they communicate. Like, I think even marketing teams are trying to figure out how to communicate products and their brand differently. It's not just, I'm just going to post something online. It's like, I'm going to use TikTok. I'm going to use Instagram. I'm going to use whatever the new thing is. And everyone's adapting to at the end of the day, I also often, when I talk about this with our own exec teams, I'm like, we may not like it. We may not understand it, but we can't change what is, right? Because these newer generations, they are defining what the future is going to look like, the future of how we purchase things, the future of how we interact, the future of how we work. Like, they are really driving that. I would say one of the bigger areas is something that, I know Lisa and I touched on earlier, and it's just this sort of this notion of career growth and advancement and how it's going to happen, right? It's interesting, they're younger generations. And I'm sure I can bet when I was coming up in the working world, I still am. I'm sure I talked to some of my older mentors who were like, you need to slow down, Sarka. You don't need to move that quickly. You're expecting too much too fast. And I find myself catching myself sometimes even wanting to say that to folks that I talk to and that I mentor that are younger than I am, or younger and inexperienced in their career. They want to move up fast. They want to move quick. But they don't necessarily always want to understand them. Like, but there's a set of skills that you really need to learn. And I can't give you a checklist. Like, a career path and, giving you competencies, et cetera, is going to give you a path, but that's not a one size fits all. It's giving you an idea and the types of things that you need to be doing. But this, there's not a one size fits all. And I always say there's beauty in sort of sitting in something for a little while, because there are natural organic experiences are going to happen in the role that you're in today that we can't necessarily teach you. You're going to learn because you've been exposed to it and it's organically happened. And there's a lot that comes from that organic learning. But that, I feel like, has been the biggest thing. It's like, our younger generations want to move quick. They want to make money really quickly. They expect these big raises all the time. Like, this is a big conversation we're having. Like, compensation transparency is something that we're working on pretty intentionally inside of our org, which I love that topic, but it's also interesting to have this conversation. And it's like, well, no, you need to pay me more for that. And, I'm not going to do that unless you pay me, or inflation, or their expectations are very different. And again, they're going to be very vocal about it in a very different way than, again, starting work in the early 2000s. Like, I would never, I even now am probably not someone that's going to be that loudly. I advocate, but I don't know that I am like that person that's going to be like, I need $30,000 more right now. And, you're going to give it to me. Like, even I'm not the greatest at that today. But that definitely, it's the biggest thing that I feel like creates a lot of the conflict, is the expectations of someone that's been in the working world a really long time, that comes from, whether it be baby boomer or Gen X, that's been taught a different way, and you sort of focus, you work hard, you sacrifice. And then our millennials and our Gen Z and now our alphas are like, yeah, sure, I'm only going to sacrifice so much, because at the end of the day, like, you could let me go tomorrow, right? I know I know I'm going to strike a balance here, because I don't have loyalty to you anymore, because I've also learned what all these other employers are doing in the world around me, which, right, they have constant access to information. Nothing gets by anybody anymore. So when they're reading all these companies doing layoffs, they no longer have that loyalty. And so they're going to do what they're going to do. And they're like, I'm going to get what I can out of you, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing if you're not going to give me what I want. And that's a challenging environment for an HR leader and an HR team, and even any business leader, to really operate in, because I don't know that it's always like in a balanced approach, but those are just some of my observations I've noticed lately. Yeah.
You introduced lots of different branches, I guess, of this conversation could go in. But I think that my next sort of area is just talking about handling resistance to change. And maybe it's my own perception, but maybe perceiving that maybe the older generation are perceived to have it more challenging to accept change, but I could be wrong there. So I'm just curious, and maybe I'll come to you, Tammy, on this one. How do you handle resistance to change? I guess from any generation, it doesn't have to be the old generation, but that was my little bias there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, change is hard for everyone, even people that say, I love change, like, it's still hard. So, the coach in me says I want to go back to the crux of why change is needed, and helping to generate buy-in. So, when any kind of resistance, there's always going to be some resistance to change, because you're trying to create new habits, new pathways. Just natural human instinct is to kind of buck that, because it's harder. We're lazy creatures. We like to do things the easy way. So I think, when you see resistance to change and you start to experience it, whether you're an HR professional, leader, or an individual on the team, right? It's about really getting to the crux of the why behind the change, and ensuring that there's buy-in to the why. I always, advise my clients from a coaching perspective to think about what's the win-win in the situation. So what's driving the change, and how does it benefit the individual? I think that is a very different mindset if we go back to kind of generational dynamics for boomers, and some for the Gen Xers, right? Like, it's not historically been about me and my advantages, right? But at the end of the day, human beings need to understand the why for them. So again, broadly speaking, I think, anytime that change is happening, you're going to experience resistance. So just fight it off right out of the gate, and make sure that there's the buy-in and understanding of the why.
Thanks, Tammy. Anyone else want to add into that one?
I don't think resistance to change is a generational thing. I think I think anyone can be resistant to change. I think that it's what is changing that's really going to drive who's going to resist it. It's how long someone that might have been in an organization for a long time and the business is now scaling is going to have a hard time, regardless of their generation or their age, the change, because they're like, well, wait a second. I loved the culture that we had when we were less than 100 people. I don't want to change all these things. Like, I loved what I had. So I don't know that I feel that's a generational thing. But to Tammy's point, what I'm finding more and more now, and I would say I'm hearing it more from our younger generations, at least inside of my organization, is like, tell me why you made that decision. Tell me the context as to why. I understand you have to make decisions all the time as leaders, but when you're announcing these, something, we made a decision that these are our top 3 priorities as the organization, but why? Where did you come up with that? What's the context? How does that, what does that mean for the role that I'm playing today? Does it change anything? Does it make my role evolve differently? It's a lot more around the why and the context, which takes a lot of time. And I often say, like, it's funny because I talk to employees all the time. I'm like, you say, transparency is this big word. And I'm like, but what does transparency mean to you? Because transparency doesn't mean you get to know everything about everything. And transparency without context is so dangerous. And that, again, is nothing to do with age. That's just in general. Like, I want to give people transparency as much as I can. But I have to be able to give you context, and equally, I have to be able to tell you the why. And I'm pretty fortunate. I work with leaders who, it's taken them a second. They're like, okay, it's a lot. It's going to take us a lot more time to do that. But I think the little, where we're doing that, we are noting it's making some more positive, inroads with employees, that they're like, okay, now I'm feeling more connected. I'm feeling more bought in to the things that we're doing because you're willing to tell me why. But I will say, from the generational perspective, I probably hear it more from the millennials and the Gen Z. Tell me why you want me to do something. I'm not going to do it until you really inspire me. And the inspire is behind the why, which I find to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we all think about, why change is hard, the basis of that is fear, right? It comes from a place of fear of, what does this mean for me, right? How is this going to affect me, my job? Where do I fit in it, right? How does this, how is this going to change things, right? And, to your point, Tammy, a really robust communication plan around the why the change is needed, right? Get the buy-in, not just from the top, right? From across the organization, and, vertically and horizontally, from, really from a lot of people, because then you have champions, right? That can go out there and talk about the reason for the change, or why we think it's better, right? It's actually going to make things better. But, it comes from a place of fear, right? Of, how is this going to affect me, right? Am I going to have a job, right? Have I just, how do I fit in, right? How do I learn to help make this change, right? So we have to understand that it comes from fear, and treat that with empathy and understanding, that it's not just, resistance because of the sake of resistance, right? Just to stick your feet in the mud and say, I don't want it. It's because we're scared, right? So it's important for us to understand that.
No, that's some great points, Lisa. And I think I guess it sort of brings me to another area then. So building on change is often with change, learning development sort of comes as part of that. And I think the way that the different generations learn and develop can be quite different. And so I'm just wondering, what's the panel's thoughts on how can companies really design and deliver training programs that are engaging and effective for this multi-generational workforce that we have today, and the different preferences and approaches that they like to learn. Who wants to give that one a go?
I can go.
Okay, go on.
Yeah. Thank you, Ren. This, allowing yourself to experiment, and at the beginning of this conversation, we had talked about understanding each, generation and the unique characteristics behind each. And so once you have that in your toolbox, then when you create that experience, you can experiment with it in terms of, okay, let's place each thing catering to each generation, and let's see if it if it turns out well, right? And so that, in addition to the design piece and the experiential piece, you have to have that data to back that up, right? And so what I like to do is each iteration, change it up, but then at the end of each experience, I take a look at, okay, from this, engagement feedback survey, what did this individual like the most? What did they like the least? Does this align with the reports I'm seeing, right, that I keep reading? Or is there an anomaly here? What is unique to my company? What is unique to the people who are coming in, who is experiencing our culture, right? And so, again, kind of that experimental spirit and just kind of like allowing yourself to iterate. Of course, with that, you have to be in a position in which leadership is behind you. Not necessarily 100%, but they're on board of, okay, let's see how that turns out. And that data backs that up so that you could come back to say, hey, look, according to my data, folks love this tool, this training on this system. This system seems to be the hardest for a lot of folks across generations. Therefore I propose this, right? And so that's usually kind of my approach in terms of creating that experience that caters to all without restricting myself to just, this is just the process and we're going to do it no matter what. But yeah.
Thanks, Linda.
Of course.
I think you also have to offer learning in diverse formats because everyone learns differently. Some people are more visual, some people need to see it on paper, some people need to see, touch, feel. And I think that's true, like even if you took multi-generation workforce out of the equation, I think that's always been true in learning and development, is finding the different ways to make learning easy and accessible, but knowing that all people will learn differently. So whether you do, little bite-sized like micro learning opportunities that people can do at their own time, I find for me what works is like on the job experiential learning, right? Like I want to learn with a mentor, someone that I can like, okay, let me try it. Like I got it. I'm going to shadow you. I'm going to go try it. And then I want to be able to talk to you and ask questions. What did I do well? What do I need to improve on the next time? Like that has worked well for me, but that doesn't work well for everyone. And there are people, depending on their backgrounds or their accessibility issues or their challenges that they have, like they need to also be able to learn at their own pace. So you also have to think about the format in which you deliver and the timing in which you deliver that. Some people want it asynchronous, some people want it synchronous. But I also think, to Luna's point, like you have to be able to articulate that's the approach. Like, hey, we want everybody to have the chance to learn, and everyone learns differently. And so we're going to design different learning opportunities in different ways because we want for so many other people in this organization, as many people in this organization, to benefit from that learning opportunity. And that's why we're doing it this way. So this also gets back to the why, right? Because if I don't give them the why, like someone that really wants it, like live synchronous training, like, why do you keep doing this asynchronously? Well, I don't keep doing it. I'm doing it because I also have a whole other part of this organization that really values learning that way. We've also found like doing a lot in the flow of work is really going to be helpful, where if they're experiential learning, that they can do sort of like things that just get bite-sized delivered to them, even via Slack. We are a big Slack organization. And so if people don't have to go to different platforms to try and learn something, and things just sort of like bite-sized get delivered to them in the context of what they're working on, I found that has been super helpful. And one thing, when Tammy talked about what are the needs and the desires of the different generations that we have in the workforce, there's also a lot of similarities in the workforce of these generations. And one thing that came up across all of the generations is this need for recognition. Everybody wants to be valued for the work that they're doing. Everybody wants to be told that they're doing a great job. Now, how you recognize someone might be different. And I think that's a conversation managers should always have with their employees. Some people want their name in lights, some people don't. But finding ways to, gamify learning, maybe it's like, okay, you do this and you get a certificate at the end, or you get a LinkedIn badge at the end, and you get to proudly display that on your LinkedIn profile. Like you got to figure out, obviously cutting back to the personas, what are the ways that people like to be recognized in an organization? Is that a generational thing? Maybe not. But it's interesting to see those things, because you can build that also into how you drive engagement and participation in the learning that you're delivering. But it's interesting because reward and recognition, like being valued for your contributions, is the biggest consistent thing across all generations. We are all the same, that we want to be told we're doing great work.
I think you make a good point that what individuals really desire, like what they see as reward, it does vary depending on what generation you're in potentially. And I think a point made earlier around, there's different desires today for different work-life balances, different versus career development can be so different. I know for me personally, I've got to get my kids to school and things like that. So I really value that work-life balance, that I can actually have time to get them to school and pick them up and that sort of stuff. Whereas I didn't worry about that, 20, 30 years ago. So, all right, I've only got 6 minutes left. I'm just wondering, I might maybe jump into the question about, well, what do we think is going to happen in this space in the next, I don't know, it's hard to say. 10 years is way too far, but the next, I don't know, next 3 to 5 years, what are we going to be seeing differently in the next 3 to 5 years, do you think? What's the future like?
Dare I say the word AI?
AI, yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be hard to see. AI is, it's changing so quickly every day. There's something new to learn. I have no idea. I'll be honest with you. I literally have no idea. I think there's going to be some element of AI getting to do the parts of the job in HR that we don't love to do, which I am really looking forward to. Automating the things that take up a lot of our manual time, which takes away the time for us to connect with our employees and design these amazing experiences. And also this whole session has me so tired because I'm thinking about man, it is really hard to be in our space right now. And it's really, really hard to design for so many different types of people with different desires and different needs and different wants. And we're trying to make everybody happy. And that's so hard to do. I'm hoping I know there's a spectrum of people that are going to accept AI or are fearful of AI. I'm somewhere in the middle. But I do love that there's parts of what I've seen, some of these products and these sort of new HR tech that's coming out that's sort of in their early stage beta stages that I've been talking to, and what AI is going to be able to do to help us in the things that we don't love to do. I'm most excited about that. So that we've got more time to fulfill the need, these bigger desires from our employees to design these experiences and around career development, around learning and development. It's hard. Like Linda talked about, working with organizations with an HR team of one. Think about an HR team of one, how much they have to handle. They can't do all of this other stuff that's also significantly important. So what does it look like in 3 to 5 years? I don't know, but it'll be very interesting to see what AI does even over the next 6 to 12 months.
I know it's definitely evolving very, very fast.
Yeah.
I think the AI for sure, just the evolving world of digital technology, how we're managing communications, different social platforms. I mean, there's going to be so much more. The speed at which change happens will continue to accelerate. I also think, depending on the type of organization you have and opportunities, in the next 8 years, we're going to have a whole new generation stepping into the workforce, so we're right on the cusp of them starting to do internships and getting into the workforce. So I think, the future is very unclear in regards to what the dynamics will be. However, I think we still go back to the basics of we're all humans. We need to make sure there's the individual perspective and understanding of what each person needs, wants, desires. We need to have the broad understanding of the organization and how to make them successful and merge those two things together. I think back a lot, just to what we were just saying around change management and how to really inspire people to continue to grow. And it does boil down to that sense of adding value, feeling valued, and keeping that as a core focus as the world continues to change around us.
Yeah, I'm curious about, are we going to get more generations in the workforce than we've got now, which seems like a lot to me now, but I guess you just look at the president in the US. He's certainly had many more generations than I've had. So I think it could just be one example. The future could be like that. All right, anything else then? So just everyone wants to leave, what's one key takeaway? We'll just go around before we finish up. And I'll start we'll go around virtually. So go Linda as well first. Yeah.
Okay, so one takeaway the question was this session or just this topic?
Yeah, the session. Yeah, because we're sort of at closing up time. So
yeah. So customization and allow yourself to experiment and just kind of do the dance with whomever's coming in and design the experience that way.
Thank you.
I think that, the key takeaway for me is, knowing as HR professionals, we need to know why people work, right? And what motivates them to work, right? And in shaping our employee experiences at work. And that requires knowing your people and talking to them. And to your point, I think AI is going to help us, give us more time to be able to create those connections and that rapport by taking the things that we don't necessarily need to be doing anymore, like writing job descriptions, right? Let somebody else do that. Let AI do that. They do it better. It's fine. It's all good. But give us more time with our people.
Yeah. I will go back to the multi-generational awareness, whether it's training, whether it's discussion, whatever that's going to look like, but that's going to be a big one that I'd really like to think about how we talk more about inside of the organization.
You stole my answer. I was going to say the same thing. I think that was a big aha for me. I do a ton of training and development for companies, and it's always on leadership skills, communication skills, emotional intelligence. So it's not on generational differences or even cultural differences. And I think that there's a big gap there. That's a big takeaway for me, is that maybe there's opportunity for us to start educating more broadly, but then also how to take that information down to the individual level.
All right. So I thank you to all the panelists for sharing your insights and experiences. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and it's clear that that navigating the generational differences is both a challenge and it's a great opportunity as well. So I hope that the people in the audience found the discussion valuable today, and I look forward to future panels. And so thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Rod. Thanks all.